Grace and peace. I'm Brian Musser, the Baptist Campus Minister at Drexel University, and this is Peace and Power Christian Fellowship. The peace of Jesus Christ to change your life, the power of the Holy Spirit to change the world. And we are continuing with Lesson 6. This is the third video in Lesson 6 as we deal with the heart of religion, looking at Matthew 6, 1 through 18 as part of our continuing series on the Sermon on the Mount. In this lesson, we are going to be looking at how religion relates to the self as we examine Jesus' teaching on fasting. Let's look at those verses real quick. But before we do that, the first video of this week was talking about giving, how giving is a religious exercise that relates us to others. And then last video, we looked at the longest portion of this section on prayer and how prayer is the religious exercise that relates to God. And basically the idea is the same with them. Even if we are doing the right religious practices, we have to make sure our heart is in the right place as well. We can't be doing it. Our motivations can't be for the wrong reason, even if we are doing the right thing religiously. And this is also true coming from and stemming from the end of chapter 5, looking at keeping the law. It's not so much that we keep the law just perfectly. It's also how and what is going on in our hearts as we are keeping the law. But let's look at these verses real quick. Matthew 6, 16 through 18. When you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces, that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you that they have received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who is in secret will reward you. That is very similar to what was said about almsgiving, about giving to others, about sharing with others, giving to others. And it's this idea that we don't do it to get praised by men. We do it because of our relationship with God and how we look at that. Now, fasting is interesting because, as you know, and we keep going over this over and over again, as a human being, we have an internal life that is made up of our will, our thoughts, and our feelings. And then we have an external life that is both our bodies and how our bodies engage in the social context. And as a human being, we should strive to be an integrated whole between those two. Fasting is that religious process that helps us make the body faithful, responsible, reactive to the will. We go without food. We choose to go without the physical need of food because to exert power of our will over our bodies so that we can learn what it means to control our bodies, so that we can use our bodies for the good we intend to do, instead of having our bodies and having our physical needs always force us to make internal decisions based on our external. This fasting helps us exercise, helps us discipline the external physical manifestation of our body to be responsive and reactive and obedient to our will. It's a very interesting way we can engage the physical body so that we use it in discipleship instead of it actually becoming a hindrance to our discipleship. Dallas Willard is talking about this teaching, puts it this way. His teaching leads to a discipline, not a law, and a discipline that prepares us precisely to act in a way that fulfills the law of whole person love of God. In other words, his commands about fasting helps us create a way that we are self-disciplined, a way that we have control over our bodies instead of our bodies controlling us, in a way that we have control over the meeting of our physical needs instead of the demands of our physical needs controlling us. And because we have control over our physical bodies, we can then choose and decide. We have so much more power and control to decide to act in whole person love for others, for God, for self, instead of just being reactionary respondents to our physical needs. D.M. Lloyd-Jones says things this way: man is body, mind, and spirit, and these are very intimately related to one another and interact very closely with one another. We distinguish them because they are different, but we must not separate them because of their interrelationship and interaction. Now, throughout history, and the Gnostics are a prime example of this, that would be about to come on the scene a little bit after the words of Jesus, a little bit after the words of Paul. But there's still some parts of Gnosticism already in development at the time of Jesus. But it's this idea that we can separate humanity into physical and spiritual beings, that they don't really relate to each other. But that's not the biblical concept, and that's not the Christian concept. As Christians, we see that we are one whole person. And what we do with our bodies affects the rest of us. And how our will is able to control our bodies affect the rest of us. And how our bodies influence our will and our thoughts and our feelings, it affects all of who we are. So the best way to describe a true disciple is where all 5 parts of who we are as a human being, our will, our mind, our feelings, our body, our social context, are all integrated well as a whole person. Not only each individual part is following Christ, but we're integrated and well organized, that each individual part is feeding one another in our following of Christ. So as we look at this, as we look at fasting, is one of these disciplines that helps us integrate our bodies into the whole, instead of letting our bodies either take the lead, or letting our bodies, or not understanding the part our bodies play in our spiritual development and our overall personhood as well. Now, question for you to answer: do you view your physical body as a useful tool or a hindrance in following Jesus? Quite often, and especially in evangelical Christian teachings, we see the body almost as if it were evil. We talk about battling the flesh. We talk about denying our bodies. And these are good ways to talk about it. But the body can also be a great tool in following Christ. If we train our bodies, if we're able to develop habits that are remembered by our bodies, spiritual habits, spiritual disciplines, practicing. Fasting is probably the most prominent of these. If we develop these spiritual habits, then our body can become a tool in our discipleship instead of just a hindrance. So it should be both and, but it can be developed into a great and wonderful tool to be used in discipleship. And fasting is one of the pinpoints of that. And Jesus used fasting because it was one of the most prominent ways Jews practiced religion at his time. But there are other sort of spiritual disciplines that we can use to develop this. And the next series following this one for the spring term at Drexel, will be looking at those spiritual disciplines in depth. So stay tuned for that. We'll do an entire series on spiritual disciplines, how we can use our bodies, how can we use our physical habits, how can we use what we do to help our discipleship process. But in here, this fasting can be used as a tool to discipline us and follow Jesus, instead of having our bodies always be a hindrance. Question for you to answer. Drop down in the chat if you have any answers to this. What spiritual disciplines do you engage in to help your discipleship process? If you can't think of something yet, wait for spring. We're going to deal with some very, very important ones in the spring, or pick up a book before then and actually start looking at how certain spiritual disciplines can help us in our discipleship process. Now, as always, in this third video, try to do some homework assignments, read the Sermon on the Mount, work together with those who are part of this group, or if you're doing this separated from us, with some people to choose a ministry to contribute to. Give something away at some point, either this week or in the near future. Pray. Spend some extra time in prayer this week, applying one point you learned about prayer. And then Finally, fast. Practice the discipline of fasting at some point during the week. The homework is really easy, was very easy to derive from the lesson this week. Um, as always, there are 3 ways to join: in person, Sunday nights at 7 p.m., live Monday nights at 7 p.m., these weekly wrap ups on YouTube and WordPress. And I am all over the social media: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, WordPress, and YouTube. Those links are in the description below. I enjoyed having this conversation with you and hope it continues again real soon.